This does not welcome students of color to Hillcrest.
You seem slightly more apologetic, even as you're describing it, than Sherry
Than
really
Sherry
is in the
is.
scene. I'm not sure there's an "I'm sorry, but we gotta." It's
That's
like
true.
we gotta fix this. The sound is me slapping my script, and we gotta get this thing fixed. Welcome back, everybody, to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jacob Mann Christensen.
And I am Jackson Nikolai. Welcome back, everybody. Excited to be back in the podcast chair with all of you today. We're excited. We're excited to get to jump into another new script. We're also excited about just the phase of the season we're in. We're in like the kind of middle ground of the season. Starting to kind of get really churning with a lot of great new variation plays that we're doing. And we're getting closer to one of our kind of hallmarks of our seasons of No Script, which is our themed month.
Absolutely. This season, we are doing a themed month, the same as we have every season. That is a month of conversations, 4 straight conversations, which all have some sort of thing that ties them together. In the past, that has been as loose as they're all musicals, or as centered as they are all by the same playwright. We've done a month on Arthur Miller. We've done a month on David Henry Hwang. We've also done things like 4 plays that have magic in them, and whole variations on that. For a while, we kept up with the alliteration, and we had like some sort of word that began with M. I think the worst one we did was we did Greek plays, and we called it like Masters Month or something.
Yeah,
that one was a stretch.
We hit that, and we're like, okay, we've stretched the alliteration as much as we can.
We know what the themed month is. We are planning avidly for it right now. We are not going to tell you this episode. Tune in next week to hear the themed month. I can't off the top of my head think of any way to make it an M, though. I'll give you that straight up at the front.
Up.
I do not think it's going to be an illiterate month this time around.
Yep, it's true. Yep, so, we're excited to get to bring it your direction out there. But yeah, stay tuned. In the next, probably in the next week or two, we'll announce the themed month and its arrival in your podcasting apps of choice.
Absolutely, that will be very exciting. And even though we're looking forward to that, this week is its own exciting week. We're talking about a new playwright to the podcast. We're talking about a really challenging, gripping play. This is a play that came to be just before the pandemic and went through that same struggle that a lot of plays from that period went through, where as they were really gaining steam, the pandemic rolled around and shut theaters down. This play, however, has picked steam back up after the pandemic, just because of the incredible relevancy, the challenge, the great, really good writing that is in this script. And we're excited and nervous to talk about this script. It's one of those where, like, doing a live show, man, sometimes you say things and you look back and you're like, I didn't mean to say it that way. That is not what I want to be recorded on the internet.
And yet here we are jumping right into it. We're going to be talking about Admissions by Joshua Harmon today, which is a great play, a great kind of small cast that allows a lot of time for you to dig into characters and their really integrated relationships with each other. I think the way that they all kind of play off of each other and the kind of reliance that each character has on the other is a really interesting way to deal with a really complex issue that this play focuses on.
Boy, yeah, this play is really getting to the heart of some of what our country is dealing with right now, and it has a powerful perspective in it, and it has a lot of challenging questions that I think will be really interesting for us to talk about.
Yeah, but before we do, want to take just a second and say thank you to all of our patrons at patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. Thank you all so much for being a part of the No Script community. Those of you who are longtime listeners have heard this before. You know, we say this on pretty much every show. We love getting to do this. We love getting to talk about these scripts, talk about theater's best scripts in these unscripted conversations, and then extend that conversation to all of you out there in podcast land. However, the endeavor is not free. We spend a good deal of time and money on the podcast, and our patrons make this podcast possible. Thank you all so much for being a vital part of this show and for the sort of community that we've kind of grown over on Patreon. If you check out the site over there, you'll find a number of different tiers of patronship. The lowest one for just $1, $12 over the course of a year. And you get access to patron-only posts over there. At different tiers, you have producer credits for shows. We just thanked a new producer just a couple or gave producer credit to a new person a couple episodes ago. So if you're looking for a way to help out the show, whether you're just tuning in or whether you're a longtime listener and looking for a way to be involved in the No Script community, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast is a great way to do that. Thank you all so much for those of you who are already patrons, and we will see you over there.
And now back to the script.
Here we go.
Hey, okay. We're at the top of a new episode about a new playwright. So it's time for a brief playwright overview. And again, we do our best in these things. There may be some mistakes. I don't know Joshua Harmon perfectly, but these are some things that you might want to know about Joshua Harmon. He is a New York City raised human being. He went to, listen to this trio of schools: Northwestern University, Carnegie Mellon, and Juilliard. A highly trained person from prestigious universities, which is interesting given the subject of this play, and I'm sure that will come into our discussion to some degree. So his first real play of any note, in fact, it ended up getting a production at Roundabout in 2012. That was a play called Bad Jews, really sort of put him on the map. And then just a few years later, in the 2014-2015 theater season, this was one of his moments. We sort of talked about a couple of playwrights that have had moments like this in the American regional theater scene, where they are one of the most produced playwrights in that scene. And that was him in 2014-2015. He was the third most produced playwright in America. And actually, it was specifically Bad Jews that was getting all of those productions. It was like the third most produced play in the country. It also got productions on the West End and toured around the world. So really put him on the map as a whatever a real playwright means in terms of getting productions of his work. 2013, he was the playwright in residence at the National Playwrights Conference at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center. 2015, Roundabout produced another of his plays, Significant Other, which went on to a Broadway run in 2017. Then the next sort of slot of his career is this play, Admissions, which I'll talk about in a minute, so I'm going to skip that for now. His most recent play is Prayer for a French Republic, which by all accounts is absolutely remarkable. I cannot wait to engage with that play. I'm working on how I can either see it or read it or something right now. It looks incredible. It won an Outer Circle Critics Award, a Drama Desk Award. It was nominated for a Lucille Lortel Award and a Drama League Award nomination. So by the accounts of the awards, seems to be really remarkable, seems to be fascinating. Looking forward to trying to get my hands on that. This play, Admissions, was first produced at the Lincoln Center Theater in 2018. Jessica Hecht was in that production, who, if you know her from Friends or more recently from Breaking Bad, she was like the billionaire friend that tries to get Walter to pay for their medical bills. That's her. She was in this production at the Lincoln Center Theater. The play was also produced, I'm just going to list some of the places that produced it before the pandemic. Obviously, this is not all of them, but some of them you may recognize. 2018, the Repertory Theater of St. Louis. 2019, Studio Theater in D.C. 2019 at Trafalgar Studios in London before it went on to travel the UK. I think it was that production that toured the UK. Also in 2019, Boston Center for the Arts, Theater Wit in Chicago. Then we hit the pandemic, of course, so we'll skip that couple of years. And then in 2022, it had productions at with the American Lives Theater. It was presented at Indy Fringe, which is in Indianapolis. And in late summer, it was presented at the Restless Artists Theater in Nevada. So sort of coming back into life after the pandemic now that theaters are starting to redo or restart their in-person performance. This play won the Egerton Foundation New Play Award, the 2018 Outer Critics Circle Award for New Off-Broadway Play, and the Drama Desk Award for Outstanding Play. Obviously, Joshua Harmon is making waves, especially at that regional theater scene, but you'll notice that he has had a Broadway production. He's had major off-Broadway productions. So if you don't know the name Joshua Harmon, you're going to want to. He is going to be producing stuff that's going to be impacting American theater for a long time, is my not-so-bold prediction.
Yes, indeed. And yeah, I think that this, as I said at the beginning, I think this play is a very producible play and one that leans well into community conversations. And so yeah, you're definitely going to be seeing you're going to be seeing his name around a lot more often, I think. I'm going to jump in and give us just a short synopsis of this play, just so that we're on a similar starting point. This is a play that is set in 2015 to 2016, a nice specific date around Christmas
it does
to Easter.
come up that's when it's set too, because they talk about the presidents at one point. And I remember reading it, and they were talking about how the presidents had all gone to these crazy schools. And I remember reading it like, wow, when was this written?
Yep. And again, as Jacob said, this was produced in 2018, so it's right in the last couple of years here, and right in that kind of big political moment of 2015 to 2016. So that's kind of in the backdrop of it, and it's set at Hillcrest, which is described as a second tier on the cusp of being a first tier prep/boarding school in rural New Hampshire. Now, this play focuses on we've done a couple of plays that focus on the demographic known as WASPs, which is White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And this play takes place in New Hampshire at a prep school that has a lot of White Anglo-Saxon Protestants in it. So this is a good point for us to acknowledge that we probably belong in a very similar demographic. We're not from New England, but we are White Anglo-Saxon Protestants engaging this play about race and the school system. So just a moment to acknowledge where we are coming from as we are reviewing this, or not reviewing, just having a conversation about this play and about the big themes that are in it.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. We have, this is this play really in general, as you'll hear as Jackson does the synopsis, has a kind of limited perspective. The cast is all white, for example, and that kind of specifically deals with what Joshua Harmon is trying to do. So I don't mean that as a slight of the play at all, but just to say that this is a particular perspective on the really major issues that are going to be talked about in this play. So for sure, check out other voices on this play, but also please, for sure, check out other voices on the issue of race in admissions, on the issue of white privilege. We'll have a discussion about how that's examined in the play, but it's just one voice of many, and hopefully you are in the business of absorbing many voices.
That said, let's jump into the synopsis. So, as I said, this play takes place from Christmas to Easter on an academic school year, somewhere around 2015 to 2016. The play starts with a conversation between Sherry and Roberta. Now, Sherry is Sherry Rosen Mason. She is in her early 50s, and she is the head of admissions for Hillcrest. She is married to Bill Mason, who is the head of the school at Hillcrest, and her son Charlie Mason attends the school and is in his senior year at that school. Roberta is her secretary, essentially secretary is as close as I can get right now, but the assistant to the admissions department.
It's a little unclear, like what she works under Sherry for 100% for sure. All we really know is that she has some role in that development admissions kind of department, which is subordinate to Sherry.
And she arrives. She's in her early 70s. They kind of make a note of the kind of separation in their ages. And she arrives, and they begin a conversation. Sherry pretty abruptly adjusts them to a fairly confrontory conversation around the admissions catalog. Now, Hillcrest has been going through a season ever since Sherry has taken control of the admissions department of trying to diversify their student body. They had been a historically white prep school and a very low percentage of students of color in their school, and Sherry's mission has been to diversify their student body. She took it from a very low number. I think 6% is what she says was what the students of color population was at the school when she arrived, and it's now at 18%. So she's been working really hard on that. And the admissions catalog that Roberta has been working on does not reflect the current student body at all. Sherry brings her in and says, this. I'm sorry, I'm like 2 weeks late on this. I know you've probably already pushed this, but this is not going to fly at all. This does not represent our student body. This does not welcome students of color to Hillcrest.
You seem slightly more apologetic, even as you're describing it, than Sherry really
Sherry
is in the scene. I'm not sure there's an "I'm sorry, but we gotta." It's
That's
like
true.
we gotta fix this. The sound is me slapping my script, and we gotta get this thing fixed.
Yeah, you get the sense that this has been a repeated conversation. Yeah. There's lines that Roberta says that Sherry like mouths along with her, because you get the sense that they've had this conversation more than once. Roberta is somewhat either unaware or resistant to some of the critiques that Sherry has. Sherry notes that there's almost no pictures of students of color in the admissions catalog. And Roberta comes back with, well, what about this particular student whose name is Perry, who will come up later? He's biracial. He's a student of color. And they get into a sort of a difficult conversation where Sherry ends up having to say, essentially, he isn't presenting as a student of color enough for what I'm going for in this admissions catalog, which sends Roberta on a different path, and a very specific path where she kind of annoyed or finicky Lee makes Sherry like state who exactly she wants in the photos. So a pretty tense conversation with them kind of starts off the play around this admissions catalog and its representation of students of color on campus. What follows is a conversation with Sherry's friend Ginny. Now, Ginny is actually the mother of Perry, the student who was being talked about in the admissions catalog. Their sons, so Perry and Charlie, Ginny's son Perry and Sherry's son Charlie, lots of E names, are friends, and they've been friends for a long time. They both have applied to go to Yale. It's been Charlie's dream, Sherry's son Charlie's dream for a very long time to go to Yale, ever since he was like 8 years old or something like that. And so they both applied to Yale, and this is the day that they will likely hear back from Yale about their admissions. Notably, Ginny is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, just like Sherry. Also, I should state at the beginning, while she kind of moves in that demographic fairly easily, her character description is early 50s, very liberal, secular Jewish woman, head of admissions for Hillcrest. So, Ginny is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. She's married to Dr. Dawn, who is a black professor at the school, and their son Perry is the biracial student that I mentioned before. Partway through the conversation, she gets a call. Ginny gets a call that Perry has gotten into Yale. He's very excited. He was at basketball practice when he called her, which is a basketball practice that we know Charlie would be at as well. So Ginny gets off the phone. She's very excited that Perry got in, and Sherry hasn't heard from Charlie yet. That scene ends, and the next scene begins, and it's a scene with Sherry and Bill worried about Charlie. Charlie hasn't come home, and it's like 9 o'clock, which is fairly early, but is odd that he would be not home at that time.
And they haven't heard from him too. I think
Yeah.
it's not so much a curfew issue as like we literally don't know where he is.
They've called, they've texted, they're not sure where he is. and they're guessing that he didn't get into Yale. But eventually he arrives home. He storms upstairs, and becomes very clear that he did not get into Yale, and he tries to storm back out the door. But they eventually get him to sit down and kind of process what has happened. And what happens is a pretty big explosion from Charlie about both about how unfair it is that he's not in Yale at all, but also particularly how unfair it is that Perry got in. You kind of see him out of his kind of pain and anger reveal a lot of kind of under the water biases of his around Perry as a student of color, around Yale's acceptance of him, around other interactions that he's had as a kind of top of his class white male student that he's had to kind of step away from, for instance, an editor-in-chief job at the school paper because a woman had applied for the same job. And he kind of goes off on this tirade about how he has been so has missed out on opportunities as a result of that, I think, from his perspective. But Bill, his dad, calls him out on it and basically calls him a racist and a sexist and says, I can't believe that you are this way, and how could you be this way? How have we raised you this way? Stop whining. You're a very privileged person and you just didn't get it. They're just better than you. And there's a big fight around that. So that kind of that culminates into that scene at the end of the part one. This play is in kind of 3 parts, about 70 pages in 3 parts. So you have the kind of explosion of that. You have Sherry trying to kind of care for Charlie and say, you've just been deferred. We'll find you. You'll probably still get in. We'll work it out. Part 2 begins in February, so a couple months have gone by, and there's a return to the admissions catalog, and Roberta has come back with basically just a catalog of students of color. For the admissions, and Sherry has more critiques for her. She says we're not trying to show that we're like segregating students, for instance. We want to show that we're an integrated student body and a diversified student body. And eventually it ends with some more complicated conversation from Roberta and them deciding to basically stage a photo shoot for the admissions catalog. What else is going on in this time frame? Charlie has quit the basketball team and is sort of morosely dealing with the ramifications of not going to Yale. This is a fairly short part, and the Ginny comes over, kind of brings cookies, is sad that she hasn't seen Charlie in a while. She and Charlie and Perry are like boyhood friends, like they've been at each other's houses all the time. Ginny is somewhat sad to not see Charlie and know that he's in pain, so she brings like cookies. And he kind of lets slip some of his biases around how Perry got in to Yale. And Ginny picks up on this, notices that Sherry doesn't correct Charlie in the moment, and extrapolates that this is also Sherry's position on how Perry got in to Yale. Sherry says a couple of things that are kind of like sympathetic to Charlie's stance, while not straight up saying that it's just because Perry checked the box on the admission sheet that said he was black that he got in. And eventually Ginny leaves, kind of saying, I can't believe that you would think this, and I can't believe that you would allow Charlie to think this, and we're done. I'm leaving. The final part of the play takes place in April. Charlie has kind of done a 180. Right away at the start of the scene, Charlie comes into his mom's office and says, I wrote this piece for the paper that talks about why it's important for white students to take a step back from some of these roles and not take advantage of the privilege that they have and reset the system by not doing these things. He says to her that I'm really ashamed of the way I showed up that night back in December. And so I'm doing this. And also I've written in the paper that you guys, mom and dad, are going to start a scholarship with the money that you save for my college for students of color to attend Hillcrest. So that's coming out in the student paper today. Have fun with that. Also, he says that I've rescinded all of my applications from all of the universities that I applied to, and I'm going to community college, and I'll pay my own way to do that. What follows is Sherry saying, no, you're not. And the process of her and Bill trying to figure out a way to undo what Charlie has done. They call a bunch of universities. They try to get him in. It's too late in the process. A lot of places say no. It becomes clear that the only way that they can have a hope of getting him into something besides a community college is by asking Ginny to talk to her sister-in-law, who works at, it's not an Ivy League school, but it's a high up school that she works at. And
Middlebury College, so
thank you.
Really expensive, mostly
Yeah.
white institution in New England, basically. So still a very high level university.
Yep. To sum up the rest of the play pretty quickly, there's another conversation with Ginny and Sherry that Ginny says, we're still not over like what you clearly think about Perry. And Sherry apologizes again that even like some sort of insinuation in that direction could have been made from her. She also says that I don't think that about Perry. And I know that you care, but even if you're mad at me, I know that you care about Charlie, and Charlie really needs this, even though he doesn't know that he needs it. And she asks her if she would please talk to her sister-in-law. Ginny says she won't, and the scene ends. But later on that night, the family is there. Bill, Sherry, and Charlie are all at their home, and Charlie comes downstairs and says, "I've been accepted to Middlebury." And who did this? And it's clear that Ginny has put a good word in for him. What follows is a scene where they essentially tell him, "We're not going to listen to what you want us to do. We're not going to let you not go to a prestigious school, because that would be denying the considerable gifts that you have and the sort of influence that, or we want you to have as much opportunity as possible given your status in life." And Charlie consistently kind of consistently resists, but slowly kind of becomes more and more lost with how he's supposed to show up to this sort of situation, until they finally just straight up tell him that you're going to this college, and that's that. He goes upstairs, and there's this kind of really poignant final image of everyone kind of separated and disconnected from each other in the middle of this family trying to figure out what to do with the amount of privilege that they've amassed and the amount of advocacy that they want to have for the world.
Yeah, and so across the course of the play, there's these like different strands going on, right? There's the story of Sherry and Bill and Charlie, the kind of family part of the story. There's the story of Sherry and Roberta trying to work on the catalog, the brochure, the recruitment tool with all the different photos and percentages and stagings and all that different stuff. And there's also the story of Sherry trying to increase the percentage of students of color in the school. And in the middle of the play, there is a big hoopla celebration about the fact that for the next year, they are up to 20% students of color. A fifth of the students are students of color at the school. And that's a big number for this particular institution. And they're very excited about the celebration. The question is, can we come up with the scholarship money to allow this to happen? And that's an open question in the play. Of course, then Charlie presents this opportunity, or this thing that he wants them to do, to take the money that he saved for college and turn it into a scholarship, could solve that problem. And at the end of the play, the final conversation between Sherry and Roberta, it's indicated that the number for the next year is at 19% now, which tells part of that story too, right? They had the opportunity to make it 20%, needed the scholarship money. Charlie presents them with an opportunity to fund the scholarship themselves because of the decision made where he decides to go to Middlebury and, take the, whatever. They don't have the money, so the number drops back to 19%. So there's a lot of kind of interesting storytelling features throughout the three different strands that you catch as you try to track the different things that are happening and how they interrelate.
Yeah, no, thank you for especially that final scene is a really important one. So there's the kind of the family together fights about him going to Middlebury, and then that last scene is Roberta coming back with the admissions catalog, and it's at least Sherry says it's perfect. This is exactly what I asked for. And there's this kind of like sadness at knowing that they're at 19% because of partially because of choices she's made, partially because of just the way the system is set up. So yeah, it's got all of these different like hints about all, I think you said three, but certainly many strands of story that are all weaving together.
Right, and I guess you could say maybe there's a fourth one, which is Sherry and Ginny's friendship. How does that relate to family?
Yep.
I mean, this is certainly a multi-layered story about this really wealthy family that is dealing with, and it's an issue where it's both very hard for them in the moment. You can tell the level of stress and pain that they're under when their values, the things that they claim to believe that literally Sherry works in admissions doing as her job, and then their personal realities come into conflict. And to me, those kinds of conflicts are such at the core of good writing. When you can put your characters in situations where the things that they value and then the way that those values play off in their life come into tension, or when the competition between their personal lives and their professional lives come into competition, where literally things within the characters are at war with each other and not just external conflicts between the characters. This play has that too, but it's also so good at putting the internal lives of the characters in conflict.
And setting it around a senior, like a child, still a teen, a senior in high school, who is the crucible around which that issue is navigated by his parents, because they are forced to grapple with their, what they at least say that they are for in their professional world versus what they are willing to do for their family, for their child. But you also have the interestingness of it being alive in him, and him trying to figure out how this affects him, how to represent both sides of that well when it's about him and about what he wants, what he has to give up about what he wants versus what he has to fight for what he wants, and what level to which he can navigate those. So you have both of them at the same time. It's interesting to see the issue grappled with from both sides of that coin.
And it's uncomfortable. I mean, it's an uncomfortable play for, I think, especially like a privileged white class of people who are asked to really face down. I think there's a pointed question that the play asks, and it does not provide, I think, any good answers. But the pointed question is, if you believe there should be more room at the table for non-white people, doesn't that mean there has to be less white people at the table? So what happens when it's you? Mm-hmm. And that's a pointed, uncomfortable question to ask. And he puts this family through the crucible of that question. And I don't think the play comes out with any real good answers. I mean, Charlie, of course, in the middle of the play, comes up with this potential thing that he feels passionate about doing, not going to college, taking that money that his family has amassed to send him to college, giving it to students of color in the form of a scholarship, and him going to a community college, not going to one of these really high-ranking, wealthy institutions that would set him up for life. So he presents this option, but that ultimately he doesn't decide to do that. He goes to Middlebury at the end of the play. And so I don't know what, I'm not sure that particular option presented by Charlie is the point of view of the playwright or anything, but it's a question. It's an examination. It's sort of an experiment.
Right, and it's an experiment, and it's a way to see people's arguments for one position or another, because people go through different stages in the play of presenting different arguments. You have Charlie presenting the arguments of for instance, the table analogy, which is a pretty poignant analogy. He said, like, if you want to keep being sure that people have a seat at the table, there's not infinite space around the table. That's not how tables work. So someone has to leave the table or make space themselves at the table. And then you have Sherry's trying to recontextualize this for her son, for Charlie, of like, you are not competing for those chairs, you're competing for the white student chairs, and trying to still like cast this sort of prestigious school and the privilege that is associated with it with this sort of other form of competition that she has been trying to create, where the white students are competing for the white student spots and there's always spots available for students of color. So you kind of see the finesse that she has been trying to navigate her world with as well.
Yeah, I want to just briefly go back to this table analogy. It's described by Charlie in the middle of his long, kind of emotionally vulnerable, explosive, very uncomfortable monologue when he's learned that he's not going to Yale. And he says some things that are painful to hear someone say. And then, of course, later on he regrets saying them. I do think that there's a level of emotional distress, which for a teenage person is hard to grapple with. But I think one of the table analogy that he brings out, I think, is really central to understanding what is going on in this play. And I think it's a really poignant, subtle point that he makes. He's talking about the reason why he didn't get chosen to be editor-in-chief at the school paper. And the benefit of writing a fictional play like this is that you can invent these circumstances. And so you can put a family through like all boilerplate, pressure point, crucible moments at once. So not only did he not get into Yale, where his person of color friend, who he feels is a less qualified candidate, all we get is their perspective on this, to be clear, but he feels is less qualified candidate gets in. But he also, in high school, was passed over for editor-in-chief of the paper, which at these prestigious high school institutions is a big deal, by a woman, and he feels, again, that she was a less qualified candidate for that spot. And the argument that is being presented is, well, there's never been a woman editor-in-chief of the paper. It's a really valuable thing for her to have that role. And Charlie says, well, hey, look, the real decision maker of the paper is the faculty advisor, and he's a white man, so why doesn't he give up his seat to a woman if this is something that he really believes in? And this is how he goes on to describe it. I'm quoting from the play now. No, his solution is to just suddenly get super self-righteous about having a woman editor because it's fucking easy to make room at a table you don't have to sit at. Well, newsflash from the people trying to sit at those tables, you can't just keep pulling chairs. There isn't unlimited room. That's like not how tables work. So let him go make room at his own table, leave mine alone. So look, the particular perspective that Charlie offers there is one I don't even know that he agrees with over the course of the play. He's emotionally vulnerable. He's in distress. So just take that out of it for just a second and consider the point, that the sort of deeper point that I think Harmon is making there. It's easy to make room at other people's tables. Yeah. It's much harder to make room at a table that you are in and that may very well require you to step back from the table. And that sort of central, again, it's a question, not an answer. The pain of that, not even the pain, the challenge of that is the question asked, or one of the questions asked here.
Mm-hmm. There's also the other thing I really like in much of that monologue, and especially in that line is certainly that thought of like, it's much easier for you to like to make room at a table that isn't necessarily the one that you're sharing power with, etc. But I also really like Charlie's statement of it being my table.
Really.
Which is
yes.
Which is a real is the other, like, especially in that monologue where you kind of get to see all of this sort of stuff that Charlie probably wouldn't agree with later on in the script, but you see this sort of stuff that's under the water all the time for him, that in this moment of lack of inhibitions and anger he lets out, and you see that kind of that hidden belief underneath, that it was his table and it's his right to step up and walk away from it, not someone else's to tell him that he shouldn't. Which is just it's a small part of that line and a small part of that monologue, which is almost a page and a half. But it's an impactful one and a revealing one for that character. Even though later on, when he has his wits about him, he wouldn't admit to or wouldn't support that stance.
No, that's exactly right. And this play is so good at Harmon is so good at finding lots of those little moments where the things that are going on underneath come kind of into the light. Calling it his table is a great example of that. Another great example is variously the three adult or the three. I guess there's four adult characters. Three of the adult characters, Bill and Sherry, their husband and wife, and they're the family, that their parents of Charlie, and then their friend Ginny, right? Those three variously discuss a sort of a famous alumni from Hillcrest School who's gone on to clerk for Supreme Court justices. This is a black man. And there is a moment where Sherry is discussing like her frustration with why this now very wealthy, very successful black man who graduated from Hillcrest is not willing to donate back. And she says he is where he is because of us, basically, is that point. She says, because we took a chance on him. No gratitude at all. And so again, sort of that under the surface stuff, right? Like we made you because we, from our seats of power and money and institution, invested in you. So we formed you. And then later in the play, Ginny discusses how her husband, who knows this person real well, talks about how that was like a miserable experience for him. Of course it was. For everybody to feel like that he's like this, how wonderful black smart kid at this school that we're gonna, give everything to, and we're gonna build up into this amazing person, and it's all us doing it. So you get another one of those moments where it's like, it's our institution. Really, the core is like, it's our institution that we are letting these things happen in, but the table is still mine.
Right. Yeah. And no character escapes the lens of the playwright and the critique of the playwright in this either. Ginny narrow, like, almost does, but then there's subtle lines from her too around, especially when Sherry is talking about how more and more of the school's students of color are being or the school is being more widely advertised to students of color in places like China or in Japan. And she's like, oh, so you're basically just getting a bunch of Asian students to come in, and you see her bias coming out in the relationship too. So none of the characters kind of have this riding above the issue sort of thing. Each of them have this stuff that's under the water that comes out when they're not really thinking about it, when they're not like on point for their positions, and it bubbles to the surface.
Well, and that's so much of what the play is, right? It's like this, here's what I'm going to say, and even what I'm going to do to a certain extent, right? As a family, as an institution, we say and do things which indicate that we are invested in this idea of diversifying our school, right? I mean, diversity really is the issue in the play. And yet there are these underneath things that they put us into conflict, and it puts us into conflict with ourselves, with the actions that we take. And so that's the question that bubbles to the surface, as you say, and it's an uncomfortable question, I think, designed to be for the audience. There's another, I think, a really great one of those moments. Roberta and Sherry are discussing the second edition of the catalog that's been produced, where it's only students of color. And of course, this is all aligning with the fact that at this moment, Sherry's also, her son didn't get into an institution that a person of color did, so she's concerned. So there's like a concern about, oh, now there's all persons of color in the catalog, so there's some plot alignment there, right? But then there's a moment, so they're talking about staging the photo and how they're going to get different students of different ethnicities into the photo, so the group appears really diverse. And Roberta says, that's 3 whites, 2 blacks, 1 Hispanic, 2 Asian. Sherry, thank you, Roberta. Roberta, I don't know their religions or orientations. Sherry, that won't be necessary. Roberta, so it's only race we care about? Just so I'm clear. I mean, again, it's just an uncomfortable question that comes to the surface. And there's no answer given, but it's a question.
Mm-hmm. which I think is why that, I mean, we often talk, or we often talk about how titles of plays are interesting in association with the plays. And I think the double entendre, or the play on the word admissions, is a really interesting one in this scenario. No one, I mean, it's a play about an admissions department, but it's also a play about all of these kind of like subconscious admissions of biases,
Yes,
of even racism at some point, of privilege, of how these characters in moments of awareness or moments of unawareness admit to these things being around them, and their role in them as well.
yeah, it's very comparable to Brandon Jacob Jenkins' play Appropriate or Appropriate. We talked
Yeah.
about that, I think, last season, and the way
Yeah.
that the title has a very specific and very pointed double meaning. And you're totally right that this does too. It's literally about admissions departments, but it's also about admitting the things
Yeah.
that are under the surface when those things come to affect you personally. And there's a lot of specific kind of political, social commentary and questions offered. But on the sort of macro zoom out scale, I do think that the sort of the macro level question that is being asked is like, what happens when the things you're trying to do and believe in come to affect you personally?
Mm-hmm.
And do those values still hold up? Do your commitments, the things that you say still hold up when your personal son is at stake? I mean, they believe this, and that shows their bias too, right? That, oh, his life's ruined if he goes to a community college. You don't necessarily have to agree with that point of view, but their point of view very much is your life, and it's probably true to some degree, your life has a much higher ceiling when you go to one of these wealthy, powerful institutions. And so for this couple, their son's life, literally his future, is literally at stake. So when you raise the pressure cooker and make it personal, then what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then so then what, both for the issues, but also then what also for your family, and for what your relationships are, because that's the other like kind of big piece of this play. Like it is a play about these issues, and it's a very intellectual play. This play has big long monologues in it, often, where a character kind of launches on a really well formed or at least passionate argument about a given position.
Well, this is not a big deal, but I just want to quibble with, I don't know that they're well formed, actually. And I think that might be part of it, is that the speeches that are given are in the height of emotional distress virtually all the time. And so these aren't the things that these characters have really thought through and have really carefully crafted. And that's where the admissions come out, right? It's that there's no opportunity to make these well-formed thoughts and speeches that you've practiced and say exactly how you want to say and exactly what you want to say when. This is like the stuff that comes out when you're not thinking.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a valid quibble. Thank you, because that is an important part of the way the play is structured. I think I'll finesse my word just a little bit, and just like their general steeped in intellectualness.
They're very smart people. Yeah,
exactly.
This is a highly educated group of people that has a lot of money, has been very successful, and they're very smart in part as a result of that privilege and success and all of that.
Right. So these conversations and these monologues and these arguments bear that in the writing, but also there's a pretty compelling just like family story happening. There's lots of little questions around the way Bill shows up to Charlie. He is much more quick to just like cut him out essentially and say, how dare you, you're terrible, how did we do this? Okay, you want to go to community college, you're paying for everything and you're never coming home.
He and Cherry have very different parenting styles.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, there's all that in the water too, of like, how is this family going to navigate this moment, and is it indicative of other unhealth beyond the kind of issue unhealth that we're dealing with in the kind of upfront level of the play.
Yeah, and it is that sort of difference in parenting styles which creates a tension between Bill and Sherry. I think that's a smart writing thing on behalf of Joshua Harmon, because otherwise I do think there's a potential that couple could be perhaps a little too aligned for that play, if this makes sense. There's conflict between all of the characters. I don't think any character, I guess Roberta and Charlie don't ever meet. The development department like assistant and the son. They don't ever meet. So perhaps they're the two characters that don't have any conflict between them. But otherwise, each group of characters, there are things going on between each other, and then those things impact what's going on inside each character to create this like onion of conflict. Right. Layers, right?
Yeah.
So I'm pulling in Shrek here, I guess.
Right. And even characters who aren't there, like for all the attention that Perry gets, this best friend of Charlie, this son to Ginny, he's never on stage. But he's a prevalent member of many of the scenes. There's the I'm gonna forget the character name. She's never on stage, but the editor in chief of the newspaper gets talked about a lot. So you have an onion of conflict all around these characters that they are constantly kind of weaving their way through in a crucible moment of trying to get into college.
Well, and it is interesting as a playwriting choice, right? That the 5 characters in this play are all white. In a play that deals with race and privilege and who gets to speak on these issues and what rooms do you have to be in to get to speak and how do you ensure that those rooms include these are all complicated, really intense questions for our society. But in a play about all those things, it's an interesting choice to have the only characters be white characters, and this is from a white male playwright. And up front, I guess not up front, we're at the back end of the episode. Right. Way back, I guess now, this play has received some criticism for that. There has been a point of view response to this play, which is, well, like, isn't it interesting that you're writing this play about how white people have the ability to be in the room just inherently, and that might not be right. And at the same time, like, you, this white playwright, and 5 white actors and characters are getting major productions at off-Broadway theaters and regional houses. Like, maybe you take your own advice, I think I've read one reviewer, I won't say the review I read because I couldn't guarantee they said this, but I think I read one reviewer say, like, take your own advice and shut up. Like, it's an interesting dichotomy. And so the form in this case and the content have some tension between them.
Which spark conversation. It's again this sort of the semantics of the value of the voices in this conversation is interesting. Like the way it sparks conversation for different demographics, but the way it also controls who's in the room is a really compelling tension around a play like this coming from the space that it does.
And I do think that one of the major values of all art, right, is the ability to say, here's the thing you're not saying, right?
Yeah.
The artists and art in general have that sort of special magic power to say, here's the thing you don't want to say. Let me put it in front of you. And that kind of core through conflict of this play, this like you want to make room at the tables you're not at. That is that thing you don't want to say. And that uncomfortable question comes out. And it's great in a play like this that there aren't any answers offered, right? I mean, I do think that might be one response to some of the criticism of like the sort of voices, who gets to speak in this play, is that there's not really any answers being presented. I don't think it would be fair to accuse Joshua Harmon of sort of dictating how he thinks diversity should work in this play. He doesn't do that for sure. He just asks the questions that he sees in these conflicts. Here are some of the things that are uncomfortable to talk about. Here are some of the things that don't have any good, easy answers.
Well, in that tension, we come to the end of our time for this podcast, and it is a play that like that holds that tension well. Of we're not going to be here to. You almost get this sort of like we are fly on the wall, sort of just watching something really messy happen for a moment in these characters' lives, and leave it feeling still very messy about it, which means there's lots of room for continued conversation around the play, whether you have been in this play, whether you've seen it, read it, or just liked the reviews or the interviews you saw about it. We would love to keep having this conversation with all of you out there in podcast land. understand and we get to on social media. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the username @NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about admissions with you.
Absolutely. If you've liked this episode or any of our other episodes, please pass your family and friends on to No Script the Podcast. They can find us at Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, any of those places. You can also like us on Facebook, and the link to a new episode will appear every Monday when we publish. Themed month is coming up in about a month.
Yeah, so get ready for that. Get excited. We'll be announcing the content of that themed month in the coming weeks. Until next week when we're talking about another play, I am Jackson Nikolai.
I am Jacob Mann Christensen. Thanks for joining us for No Script the Podcast.